My name is Elton, and this is a mini-series on my channel where I'll be taking a look at artifact sets that have similar effects and uses, specifically for characters who can utilize them well, but have to go through some sort of constant debate of which one to choose. I hope to shed some light on how these sets differ and whether the trade-offs that each of them have are actually worth it, as well as how units can actually proc these effects properly. However, like always, I have to give a disclaimer. I'm not here to calculate percentages or crunch the numbers on any character's damage output. I am only here to explain how these artifacts work, how well they work in the current state of the game, and how well these effects can be taken advantage of. I am not here to shame, humiliate, or insult anyone who chooses one set over another for their builds. I also want to say that I do compile my information from the most up-to-date guides from the Kaching Main's website, as they have a plethora of very helpful information, so if you're wondering where I got all this knowledge, I got it from there. Now, with all that said and done, welcome to Artifact Antagony. Today's episode will discuss another pairing of an elemental-specific artifact set. In the past, the first and second episode of this series talked about the Pyro and Electro versions, and both times, Crimson Witch and Thundering Fury, the more offensive ones in their respective pairings, happened to come out on top, due to the offensive push that they gave being a lot more valuable than the defensive utility of their counterparts. However, this time, the Hydra-related artifacts are both solely DPS, which means it's not a difference between offense and defense, but a battle between who can do more damage. Art of Depth's 2-piece effect gives a 15% Hydra damage bonus, while its 4-piece effect grants the wielder a 30% increase in normal and charge attack damage for 15 seconds after they use an elemental skill. This effect can be kept up as long as the equipped character activates their elemental skill. Nymph Stream's 2-piece also gives a 15% Hydra damage bonus, while its 4-piece effect is another long drawn-out paragraph. Seriously, why are always the new artifacts the ones to have an essay-length light explanation for their 4-piece effects? Anyways, the 4-piece effect pretty much goes a little something like this. Whenever the equipped character's normal, charged, or plunging attacks, as well as the elemental skill or burst hits an opponent, 1 stack will be gained that lasts 8 seconds. There are a max of 3 stacks obtainable, and while having these stacks, they will grant the character increases in attack and Hydra damage bonus. 1 stack gives 7% attack and 4% Hydra damage bonus, 2 gives 16 and 9%, and all 3 gives you 25% and 15%. Each of these stacks have their own independent timers, and a stack exists independently for each type of attack. So, at a first glance, it's pretty easy to say that Nymph Stream seems like the better artifact set. This is because of its attack and Hydra damage bonus increases, as well as not being restricted to only increasing normal and charge attack damage like Heart of Depth does. However, this is not always the case, as there are a fair amount of characters who rely solely on one part of their kit to deal damage, so that will be the defining factor in determining which artifact set seems to be more resourceful. Another thing I would like to go over is the fact that despite these two being Hydro sets and DPS ones at that, there's nothing in either of the 4-piece effects that mention increasing Hydra-related reaction damage. Unlike Crimson Witch and Thundering Fury, who both increase elemental-related reaction damage, and Desert Pavilion Chronicle and Husk of Opulent Dreams, who increase their own raw damage, Heart of Depth and Nymph Stream seem to curiously follow the latter. This doesn't really make any sense when you take into consideration the fact that Animo and Geo don't have any reactions that can increase their damage, when Hydro does. This makes me wonder if Hydra reactions were broken to begin with, and the developers probably were like, yeah, no, we can't make the two overpowered. Hydra is needed in so many teams, and is included in many of the powerful ones, so I could understand if they thought that. I think that if they did end up increasing the reaction damage, it might get too overpowered, but then again, we'd have to actually see it in order to know. So, for the characters, we have the true main DPSs, and then we have the more niche builds that may or may not work. It's actually pretty simple in discerning who works on what, and I feel like the 3 Hydra DPSs that we have right now prove exactly that. First up is Childe. He's the original Hydra DPS way back in the day, and even now, he still holds up. His kit has a Riptide mark applied whenever he either does a charge attack with his bow, or when he lands a crit hit with his normal or charge attack in his melee stance of his skill. Additionally, this mark counts as different types of damage in different situations. When an opponent marked with Riptide gets hit by his melee stance burst, then it will clear and deal damage, counting as burst damage. And when they're hit by a normal or charge attack from his melee stance, it will trigger and deal Hydro damage every 1.5 seconds, counting as skill damage. It's pretty clear to see what Childe would be best on. Back in the day, Heart of Depth was his go-to, with most of his damage coming from his melee stance, normal, and charge attacks, and then a massive nuke would come from his burst. But Childe can match the requirements needed for Nymph's Dream. Childe gets 1 stack from his normal and charge attacks, making it 2, and then his Riptide Mark procs also trigger, counting as coming from his elemental skill, making it 3 unique ways that we can get his stacks, fulfilling the 4-piece effects condition. Gameplay-wise, this also makes sense. You would switch to Childe in his melee stance, performing normal and charge attacks while applying the Riptide Mark. Then you'd finish it off with his burst and melee stance with all 3 of its stacks, increasing his burst damage. Heart of Depth is still amazing on him though, as most of his on-field time is spent on his normal and charge attacks, but since such a huge part of his damage comes from his burst, it stands to make more sense that increasing attack and hydro damage to buff everything would end up being a lot more useful. Next up is Ayato. He was the next Hydra main DPS to grace the game, and his kit circulates around his normal attacks. His elemental skill transforms his normal attacks to have a Hydra infusion for 6 seconds, while his burst summons a massive field where water droplets rain down on enemies, dealing Hydra damage. His skill also summons a water illusion that will explode and deal some damage if opponents are near it. The normal attacks in his skill state are still counted as normal attacks, however, and fulfill one of the stacks of Nymph's Dream. His burst also has a lot of chances to proc this as well, and his water illusion that he summons is counted as an elemental skill attack, giving him the final stack. Ayato also scales off of attack, so it seems like Nymph's Dream is a good fit for him. However, there's a lot of inconsistencies hidden deep within this. First is his water illusion. It's not consistent with exploding, and counting on it to do so isn't a good idea. It's also completely stationary, meaning that it can't be moved around, nor does it have an ability to home in on a target before being spawned. That's 1 stack down. Next is his burst. His burst has an energy cost of a whopping 80 energy. Even with the second passive that can slowly help him regenerate 2 energy every second until it reaches 40, this only works off field and still doesn't account for the other 50% of the burst cost. Even with the secondary hydro unit, this burst is not usually used every rotation, as doing so would slow the offensive push of the team and be very clunky to pull off, so the stack from the burst is inconsistent. Additionally, the other 2 ways of getting stacks aren't possible due to the burst locking him out of the plunging and charge attacks. The only guaranteed stack is from his normal attack. Besides, Ayato's best set is Heart of Depth. His main source of damage is focused in his normal attacks, not really in his burst. Heart of Depth can increase his normal attack damage right after his elemental skill is used, which is exactly how Ayato activates his infusion, and his 6-second infusion falls under the 15-second window of Heart of Depth as well. And the last main DPS is the all-powerful Neuvillette. Now, Neuvillette has a special version of his charge attack that he relies on to deal pretty much all of his damage. When Neuvillette is near a source water droplet and holds his charge attack, they will be absorbed, healing him while also filling up the ring of his special charge attack. During his special charge attack, he will continuously lose HP as it fires. These source water droplets are produced from his skill and his burst. When his skill hits an opponent, it will produce 3 of these droplets, while his burst will also give him 6 more when the second set of his burst attacks activate. Now, Neuvillette is a catalyst, which means that it's pretty easy to get the 3 stacks of Nymph's Dream for him, since he can either use his burst or skill to produce droplets, use a normal attack, and then go right into his charge attack. However, most of Neuvillette's damage is in his charge attack, meaning that Heart of Depth's 4-piece effect benefits him more, especially when he can work in more than 1 powerful charge attack into the 15-second window. Not to mention, Neuvillette is a character whose damage scales off of HP, not attack, so he can't benefit from Nymph's attack bonus. Heart of Depth wins over Nymph's Dream in this situation, but this isn't actually Neuvillette's best set. Marchase Hunter is actually the best for him due to its crit rate increasing 4-piece effect whenever the user's HP fluctuates, which is one of the most valuable stat increases that you can find in the game. With the special charge attack draining his health and the droplets restoring it, Neuvillette has a pretty easy time proccing its effect. Okay, so now that the main DPSs have been discussed, let's get down to the more niche builds and explanations of other Hydro characters. The first one that I want to discuss is Candace. This is because her kit is quite unique in being able to impart a short but abundant amount of Hydro infusion with her burst. She can either use her burst to infuse herself or other teammates, allowing everyone to become somewhat of a Hydro DPS. But in this situation, Candace turning herself into a main damage dealer would make the most sense, and the most convenient. Her best artifact set for this on-field playstyle would be Nymph's Dream, due to her being able to very easily gain its stacks consistently. She would usually be doing normal and charge attacks in a vaporized team while weaving in a skill or 2. However, there is a need to build for both HP and attack, due to both increasing her damage, whereas usually only HP is desired for only playing her as a support. Now, Candace's infusion can also be used on other characters as well, and one such character was Xingqiu. We all know how strong he is as a sub DPS, but with Candace's infusion, he can now be played as an on-field main DPS. He would be best suited for Nymph's Dream with this kind of playstyle. With multiple instances of damage from his burst and normal and charge attacks, Xingqiu can actually end up dealing a crazy amount of damage. Speaking of infusion, there's another character that can opt to give herself a Hydro infusion, and that's Nilou. Nilou's elemental skill can diverge in two different ways, on the third hit of it, and it can either give her Hydro infusion or a ring of water that applies Hydro to enemies. Usually the latter is more popular when playing her due to the ease of being able to apply Hydro to set up bloom reactions for her bountiful bloom teams. However, the infusion can be used in vaporized teams given that her damage scales off of HP. Nymph's Dream wouldn't be very effective despite her being able to achieve 3 stacks. Heart of Depth would be much more useful and preferred when playing her as a vape DPS. And as for Catalyst, Kokomi would have to be built on a ridiculous amount of crit rate to even come close to being played comfortably as a main Hydro damage dealer. This is again due to her very interesting passive that gives her a negative 100% crit rate. As for Barbara, there were builds in the past where Heart of Death were given to her so that she could be quite the formidable vaporized DPS with her charge attack. But Mona is probably the best out of the 3 Hydro Catalysts to become a main DPS. She has a taunt that can distract enemies as she attacks, and her burst gives a damage bonus that I guess she can take advantage of herself. So again, looking back, Nymph's Dream does seem like the more powerful set because of the simultaneous increases in attack and Hydro damage bonus. Heart of Depth locks itself into a niche that doesn't allow for other sources of damage to be boosted other than normal and charge attacks. This incentivizes Hydro characters to either be archers and catalysts or have Hydro infusions if they are melee weapon users. This limits its usage. However, Nymph's Dream also has a limitation, albeit a hidden one. It's the fact that its effect helps attack scaling DPSs the most. This means that even though the additional Hydro damage bonus is powerful, it means that Hydro DPSs that don't scale on attack can't really benefit from the other side of the stacks. And it does seem like the game knows this, by having DPSs who use Nymph's Dream suit it perfectly, dealing damage based on attack. And for those that don't, they pretty much deal almost all of their damage through their normal or charge attacks. These two sets have given 2 different ways of increasing Hydro damage, and they do a good job of preventing overlap. Yeah, this was a much shorter episode in the series, but given the limited amount of Hydro characters, this is kind of obvious to begin with. And the hardest part of this video wasn't actually even writing the script or editing, but trying to find a suitable Neuvillette portrait render. Even so, I still failed in being able to find one, so I just sort of edited one together. But yeah, you already know what button to press if you want to see more on a regular basis, and if you have something to say, I can only hope that it's nice. Thank you, and bye!